Hello, world. Good afternoon, namaste, and Nisam Bulavinaka from Sydney, Australia. I am Sashi Singh, and welcome once again to Sashi Singh's Talking Point on this first Sunday in May. Apologies for the late delay. A bit more about our technical hitch after Nikhil Singh's segment. In episode 18 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point program today, we will shortly be joined by our chief guest, Ms. Lenora Qereqeretabua, National Federation Party Member of Parliament. And in an in-depth interview with Lenora, we will discuss her early beginnings, her entry into politics, the experience of parliamentary life, real issues affecting Fiji today, talk about women's issues, and of course, the forthcoming general elections in Fiji. As we begin, may I please request that you share the SSTP page on your own timelines so that we may share the interview with Lenora with as many interested people as possible, and to ensure that you receive instant notifications of all future programs, please like and follow the SSTP page. And once again, if you're joining us for the very first time, a very big welcome to you, to our regular listeners, to our viewers, rather, our milestone followers, and our top fans, welcome back. A big Nissan Bulavinaka to you. I hope you enjoy this afternoon's program as well. Welcome to the Thinking People's program, Sashi Singh's Talking Point, live on Facebook. As always, we begin today's program, episode 18 of SSTP, with a warm welcome to our regular contributor, the one and only former Fiji TV journalist, Nikhil Singh, to tell us of the key happenings of the political week in Fiji and in Australia. Nikhil, welcome to SSTP. A very good afternoon to you. My apologies to you for the delay.
Good afternoon to you, Sashi. And I was waiting, but I understand we had some technical issues. Not a problem at all.
Wonderful, Nikhil. Now, let's begin as we do with news from Fiji. The press and news media, as the fourth estate, play a crucial role in any democracy, Fiji, of course, being no exception. Now, the media in Fiji, however, is subjected to some very punitive laws, including the Media Act, resulting in either self-censorship or media bias, and that bias towards the ruling party. Given the challenges, Australian National University Pacific Research Fellow and Associate Professor in Journalism and Coordinator of the Communication and Media Program, Dr. Shailendra Singh, has highlighted the role and importance of social media. Please tell us more.
Well, Sashi, Dr. Shailendra Singh is an expert in the field of journalism and academic, as you point out. He addressed a workshop last week organized by Dialogue Fiji on building public confidence in elections in Fiji through civil society reforms. The Fiji Times reported on this, but I also have received a copy of Dr. Singh's full speech. Dr. Singh told the workshop that when mainstream media fails to hold truth to power, social media is the savior for the opposition and the public. He went on to say, and I quote, "We analyzed mainstream media coverage of the 2018 Fiji elections to be published soon. We found that all national media gave overwhelming positive coverage to the ruling party except one. The opposition was shut out. This claim is not based on hearsay but solid research. Besides the Fiji Times, the only place to find dissenting views during the 2018 elections was social media. In Fiji, social media is pivotal because mainstream media is hampered by the Punitive Media Act. Dr. Singh also touched on the ills of social media that include racism, xenophobia, cyberbullying, and hate speech, all rife in Fiji. as in many other countries, and also sophisticated examples of disinformation which peak around elections. And such you tackle issues like disinformation, Dr. Singh said education, not just legislation, is the way to go. His main point on this was, and I quote, we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater by over legislating social media or underappreciating its value. Dr. Singh said social media can be empowering and liberating as well. Education should become part of the school curriculum. This is because any government, by nature, will try to control social media to curtail criticism, win elections, and stay in power. Only if the population is well educated in what social media means in a democracy will they challenge governments trying to take over social media, Sashi.
Well, I've known Dr. Shailendra Singh. In the good old days, he was a damn good journalist in the Fiji Times. And his comments on social media speaks the truth. And hopefully, Nikhil, one day we can get to talk to Dr. Shailendra Singh as well on aspects of media and social media in Fiji. Moving right along, last week you reported the Fiji Labour Party leader, Mahendra Chaudhry's call to have ballot papers serially numbered. Now, the supervisor of elections, Mohammed Saneem, has responded to the call. What has he said?
Well, just recapping, the FLP had asked the Electoral Commission to have serial numbers on ballot papers as used to be the case in all elections before the 2006 Bainimarama coup. The FLP, in their view, said a credible ballot paper reconciliation account is not possible unless the papers are numbered. But the supervisor of elections, Mohammed Saneem, has come out last week and rejected FLP's call, saying a ballot paper is not a receipt. As reported in the Fiji Times, Saneem said, and I quote, you should not be able to trace a ballot paper back to the person who marked it. Otherwise, why have elections? Just have a show of hands system. Now, Sashi, I'm not sure if the supervisor of elections is obfuscating on this matter, as this is a call for simply a credible ballot paper reconciliation. I'm not aware of the elections office or any other authority prior to 2006 going out on an exercise to see how an individual has voted. FLP leader Mahendra Chaudhry has said that in the last two general elections, the opposition was apprehensive about the large number of voters earmarked for pre polling. He said, and I quote, many of them are within accessible distance of polling stations and can vote on the general voting day. This is the kind of unsettling backdrop against which the nation is preparing to go to the polls, Sashi.
Well, Nikhil, maybe it's time we try to get Mr. Apted on the program as a former supervisor of elections. I know he's in Washington right now, but I think a program beckons with John Apted as well. Now, the laws on funding election promises, election campaign has begun in Fiji, but last year the Fiji First government made changes to the Electoral Act that now require political parties to provide a written explanation on the election promises they make. The National Federation Party says the laws on funding election promises are ridiculous. I'll be talking more about this with our chief guest today, but in the meanwhile, Nikhil, what do you have for us on this front?
Well, Sashi, the Fiji First government introduced a bill to make amendments to the Electoral Act in July last year. I'm sure you'll be shocked to know that this amendment was tabled by the government under Standing Order 51, tabled one day, passed the next. The Electoral Act has now got four specific requirements. The first, how this commitment will raise revenue if a political party, supporter, candidate are making any claims or making promises. How will this commitment raise revenue? The second being where they will get funds for the exercise. The third, how this exercise is to be carried out by the various sectors and budget sector agencies. And the fourth, if the proposals cost more money, more than the money that the government expects to raise from taxes, how they will meet the shortfall. Now, here's the thing, Sashi. If a political party, candidate, or their agent or political party supporter who makes this claim as part of the campaign fails to follow these clauses, it is an offence, and if they are convicted, they can face fines of up to $50,000 or a jail term of up to 10 years or both. As you pointed out, Biman Prasad from the National Federation Party has labelled the funding laws as ridiculous. In a statement, Prasad said, and I quote, while the laws require candidates and political parties to make financial disclosures similar to a budget, they do not specify who will scrutinize the disclosures. He questioned who is the independent authority to scrutinize financial commitments of promises made by political parties and candidates that is now a requirement under the electoral and financial management laws. Parties are required to furnish detailed information on how we will fund our promises, despite not knowing the real picture of the economy or the treasury, because this government, and I quote, is an expert in cooking statistics, and failure to do so can result in a candidate being prosecuted, fined of up to $50,000, or face imprisonment for 10 years or both. He said these kind of laws make the campaign platform an animal farm. As you pointed out, Sashi, you will go into this a little bit deeper with your guest today.
Most certainly will. One needs to determine who is the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Now, Nikhil, Sodelpa is the first cab off the rank to announce their provisional candidates. What do we know about this? And I realize there seems to be some notable absentees from the announced list.
Yes, so as the Fiji Village has reported, Sodelpa has announced its 28 provisional candidates who will be contesting this year's general elections. The provisional candidates include Sodelpa leader William Ngavoka, sitting MPs Anare Chale, Michele Liwere, and Tanya Wanganika, my apologies. Former parliamentarians Mere Samusoni, Semesa Karavaki, Kini Viljame Kilraki, and Josefa Dulaki Verata have also been announced. Sashi, notably missing from the list are current opposition leader Tuidakau Ratu Nengama Lalambalavu and sitting MPs Filipe Tuiswau and Aseri Randondro. Now, will they appear in the next batch, or are we going to see them join the City Veni Rambuka-led People's Alliance, as done by a number of former Sodelpa members? Guess we will find out. But we have seen a post by People's Alliance today, Sashi, that they will be holding a special announcement tomorrow. Is it to do with their announcement of provisional candidates? That remains to be seen.
All right, and closer to home, Nikhil, a lot of talk about an interest rate rise as early as next week. Not the most ideal situation for the current government in the middle of an election campaign. What has triggered these interest rate hike suggestions?
Well, Sashi, it is because Australia has recorded the largest quarterly and annual increase in inflation since the introduction of the goods and services tax in 2000. The quarterly figure is at 2.2%, and the annual being 5.1%. Nine News has reported that the shock inflation figure largely beat market expectation, which was expecting an increase to match that of the global financial crisis when the annual CPI hit 5% in September 2008. A larger than expected rise in inflation may also force the hand of the Reserve Bank to hike interest rates at the next meeting, which is on Tuesday next week. This doesn't favour the Morrison government's efforts to be re-elected. We are just 3 weeks out from election day. The ABC reports that the last time interest rates rose during an election campaign was in 2007. Inflation had hit 3%, and the Reserve Bank was worried it might climb higher. Its decision to increase rates just 2.5 weeks before polling day didn't go down well with the then Howard government. Howard, already facing a likely election defeat and with nothing to lose, offered an immediate apology to mortgage holders. As we know, the Howard government was defeated with Howard losing his own seat. Scott Morrison must now be contemplating how he will respond if dealt with his own mid-campaign interest rate hike next week, Sashi.
And in episode 2 of SSTP, which aired in November last year, you reported on the industrial strike action taken by some 60,000 teachers in New South Wales, and that was over a pay dispute with the New South Wales government. Teachers are planning to go on strike again this coming week. What is the dispute this time around, Nikhil?
Well, the stoush between the union representing school teachers and the New South Wales government is far from over, Sashi. The Guardian Australia reports that New South Wales public school teachers will strike next Wednesday after a unanimous vote by the union state executive amid major concerns over wages and conditions. Teachers will also be allowed to walk off school grounds when any state government MP is visiting. The first this kind of action has been rubber stamped in at least a decade. The union is arguing for a pay rise of between 5% and 7.5% under the current laws introduced by the Liberal National Coalition. Public sector wages increases are kept at 2.5%, Sashi.
Well, Nikhil Singh, thank you very much for your beautiful wrap up of news events from Fiji and in Australia. Certainly appreciate your contribution as always. Look forward to seeing you in the next program. Thank you very much, Nikhil.
Thank you, Sashi. I look forward to your interview with your guest, who is our former media colleague.
Yes, indeed. We'll be talking to her very shortly, Nikhil. Thank you now. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live. We ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. Fijians want to know. As I said at the beginning, please follow and like the SSTP page if you have not done so. An important announcement to share with our viewers: Sashi Singh's Talking Point, SSTP, recognizes that questioning, constructive arguments, and opinions are part of conversation. But posts with aggressive personal attacks, profanity, name-calling, swearing, defamatory in nature, and/or threatening will be removed immediately, and offenders will be blocked from being part of the SSTP program. So let's observe these rules, enjoy the program, and let's be nice, kind, and civil to each other. At this juncture, on a personal note, I'd just like to share two reasons because of the delay of today's program. One was that, on a personal note, my mother has been in hospital for the last 2 weeks, and late last night I was advised that she was transferred to the ICU, intensive care unit. And then I got a call that I had to see the consultant at 10 o'clock Sydney time this morning. And hence the reason for my delay. Things are going to progress on a day-by-day basis, and our hope and prayers are that she does recover and come back home. But it's one of those things, and I personally apologize to all those people who've been waiting from 11 o'clock Sydney time, 1 o'clock Fiji time. And then, of course, there was a technical hitch which we managed to fix up. And I understand that my chief guest also advised me that power, I believe, in the Central Division is out, and poor Lenora had to make her way to some special places with backup power. And hence, we've got Lenora in with us as well. So, as I mentioned, our chief guest today is current Fiji Member of Parliament for the National Federation Party. Lenora Qereqeretabua was a broadcaster in a previous life. She's the daughter of former Miss Fiji Etha Uluvula Qereqeretabua and renowned hotelier Mr. Randike Qereqeretabua. In 1988, following the footsteps of her dear mum, Lenora was crowned Miss Fiji as well. I remember that day so well, as I was broadcasting at the crowning ceremony. From 1995, she anchored the Pacific Community's Pacific-wide news show, The Pacific Way. She also worked as a public relations consultant and served on the board of Save the Children, Fiji. In 2015, she was appointed to the National Flag Committee. In February 2018, She was announced as a candidate for the National Federation Party in the 2018 elections. During the election campaign, she advocated for women's rights and more women in parliament. She won the 2018 elections, winning the NFP's third seat in parliament. There's a lot to talk about this afternoon, and with that, let me welcome and say a big Nissan Bulafinaka to our chief guest, Lenora Qereqeretabua. Lenora, welcome to episode 18 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point.
Bulavinaka Sashi, and may I just say at the very beginning that I really do hope your mom recovers very quickly, and I'm really sorry to hear that she's in hospital.
Thank you very much, Lenora. Means a lot. Okay, look, first of all, thank you for agreeing to be my chief guest. It takes quite a brave person to come on, and you were very, very accommodating right from the time I contacted you. So I sincerely thank you for that. Wonderful to have you along.
Thank you.
Now, let me begin, and I do this with all my guests, and I really don't care because this segment of mine upsets so many people. People don't, there's a lot of people who don't like me asking questions about background. Some people have written to me and have said, don't ask background, we know about the person. My take on that is, you may know about the person, but hundreds of my viewers don't. So I dedicate the beginning of my program to finding a bit more. So let's begin at the beginning, as they say. How would you describe your early childhood, Lenora?
Well, my early childhood was very exciting, actually. I was born in Lautoka, but as a toddler, grew up in Suva. And my dad was the secretary of the Fiji Arts Society. I think I had the name right, Fiji Arts Society. And in 1974, Suva hosted the first ever Pacific Festival of Pacific Arts. And I remember as a 4-year-old standing on the stage in Albert Park and just being absolutely mesmerized by all the movement, the sounds, and the dancing from the teams from all over the Pacific. And after that, we had ballets and symphonies come through Fiji to perform at the then Suva Civic Center. I have a younger brother, and our childhood was very interesting in that after being in Suva, we moved to Nadi, where Dad took up the position of general manager of the precursor to Tourism Fiji, the Fiji Visitors Bureau based at Nadi Airport. So all of a sudden we were thrust into the tourism industry while Mom was a community health nurse. So we had the best of both parents' work. We were in touch with the community through Mom, traveling all over the Nandi area, visiting homes. At the same time, we were in touch with tourism and with tourists from a very early age.
And if I asked you just described that Pacific Arts Festival, 4-year-old young girl watching and being mesmerized. If I asked you what is your earliest memory, would that be the one, or would you have a far more significant memory to share with us?
I do remember, I was born in Lautoka, and I can't remember the name of the building that we were in. My parents used to put me in the sheet as they were folding sheets. They would put me in the sheet and swing me to try and help me go to sleep. So that is one of my earliest memories, is lying in a huge sheet being rocked. One end is my mom and one end is my dad.
What a memory, because a lot of parents in those days used their bed sheets to do rockabye baby to put babies to sleep. So you were one of them. Now, what about schooling life, Lenora? Please describe your early schooling life.
Well, I know kindergarten. I attended the YWCA kindergarten on Devon Road. And then as a kid, I don't know what happened, but I remember, I think I overfed the fish in the aquarium. When we came back the next day, the fish were floating belly up in the aquarium at the YWCA kindergarten. But I also remember that I had to leave kindergarten early and go and start class 1 at Annesley Infant School. Then when we moved to Nandi, I attended Namaka Public School. Both my brother and I attended Namaka Public. And then after I moved on to Sri Vivekananda High School, which is now called Swami Vivekananda College. But in Form 1 or Class 7, as it was then, for the first term, I attended my mother's old high school, Andira Kumbar School.
All right.
After Form 4, after I did the Fiji Junior Certificate in Nandi, I then moved to Canberra and finished high school there.
Okay, and who would you say was an early influence in your life?
My grandparents, in particular, my grandmothers, both my paternal and maternal grandmothers. My maternal grandmother, Bumbu Sai, was very influential in my mother's life and also in my life. She lost her husband, my mother's father, when she was pregnant with her youngest child. And she was younger than 40 when her husband passed away. And what my grandmother did, according to my mom, is she told her sons, I have to take you out of school. You know, they're living in the village in Nahoka and Etasiri. I have to take you out of school, but urged the girls, her daughters, including my mother and her sisters, to stay in school and get a good education. So my grandmother was very progressive for a lady from Natabea and Nahoka in those days.
All right. And how did you get into radio? How did you begin your journalism career?
Well, I really wasn't a journalist, Sashi. I was a broadcaster, so I didn't work in a newsroom at all. But I remember I was asked to MC a function at the Ming Palace. Used to be called the Ming Palace. And right after emceeing that function, William Parkinson walked up to me and said, "Hey, we're looking for part-time announcers. Would you be interested in becoming a part-time announcer?" I think this would have been, in the 90s, I think. But then, I started off as a part-timer. And then I'm trying to get the timeline straight. I started as a part-time announcer for William Parkinson's FM 96 a long time ago.
You and I share something common. William Parkinson was our boss at one time or another, because I got my first job in Fiji with FM 96 as well.
There you go.
All right, Lenora, in moving forward, what are values that are so important to you in life?
Oh, gosh. Honesty is one of them. I'm sorry, if you can hear the child running down in the corridor, it's because of the power cut in Suva. I had to come and find a hotel room very, very quickly. So there are kids running up and down the corridor. I apologize for the noise.
That's okay. That's okay.
So truth, honesty, transparency, especially in a government, those are values that that are important to me.
Now, I've noted that you've been an outspoken person on matters that concern women and civic issues. Why is there a need for Lenora to speak up? Where do you get this trait from?
Well, I should tell you this story if we have the time. It goes right back to when I was in boarding school as an 11-year-old. I'd never been in a boarding school before, never been in an all-girls situation before in a school. So at the very beginning of term 1, in class 7 or form 1, there was an athletic competition in school. And for some unknown reason, I was apparently a fast runner. So I was put in the sub-junior girls 4x100 meters, I think 4x100 meters, to start training for an athletic competition further down the school year. And while my friends from my dormitory and the whole school were cutting grass or, cleaning the compound in the morning, the athletes did their training. And I'd never run, any huge length. But as I was fast, I was in the athletics squad. One morning, sitting in the dining room, I remember looking down at my breakfast and I thought, wow, our breakfast, the athletes' tables breakfast, is different from what the girls behind me are eating. And my 11-year-old brain just thought, this is highly unfair. And, I should do something about this. 11 years old, first time in boarding school. So I wasn't exactly going to go up to the cook and say, I demand a change. I demand that every, student eats the same as the athletes. I couldn't do that. So what I did was I went and took myself off the athletics team because I thought it was unfair that we were eating better food than the non-athletes. So that was probably the start of, things that made me say, if I can, that's the old song, things that make you go, That was probably the earliest time when I saw what I thought was unfair and wanted to do something about it.
And that has continued with you to this day, to speak up?
Yes, it has.
All right. Now, where did you get the political bug, so to say? I mean, what was that one event or scenario that got you interested in politics?
Sashi, in 1986, I had just done my ASAT exam in Canberra and applied for a place at the University of Canberra to do communications in the new year, 1987. But at the same time, in December 1986, the then Fiji television, the fledgling Fiji television, was about to be opened in Fiji by Channel 9 from Sydney. So they were asking for applications. They were looking for 6 people from Fiji to send to Sydney, to the Australian Film, Television and Radio School in North Ryde, to train up as television producers, directors for the new company in Fiji. And they were doing the same in Papua New Guinea. So I, as an 18-year-old, I thought, hang on a minute, I tried to talk to my parents about it. I said, Mom, this is a communications degree, yes, but this is the job that I'd eventually like to get with that degree. So can I just go straight for the job and not do the degree? Mom and Dad both said I should do the degree, but I kept on badgering them until the point where they said, okay, fine, just apply for the job and we'll see what happens. I applied. I was the youngest one to get one of the 6 positions. And interestingly, I don't know how many people know this, but the current Attorney General, Aya Said Kayum, was one of the 6 of the team that was chosen from Fiji to go to Australia. And so we all went there and met our counterparts from Papua New Guinea and did 3 months of very intensive TV production training. We came back, and within a month, the 1987 coup had happened. So that for me was the beginning of being conscious, really conscious of politics in Fiji. Though during high school in Canberra, I had taken a unit in year 11 called legal studies, where we did civics and learned about, basic legal issues and politics.
So that awareness, that political consciousness that you just spoke about, that was the beginning of the political bug in Lenora.
Yes, but it didn't really grow. It just stayed a little bug or somewhere in the background. There was a lot of other things happening in my life. I became a mother not long after that, and so there were other, more important things happening in my life. I remember the 1 or 2 protests that I took part in those great old days when we could protest in Fiji, was during the anti-nuclear protests that were happening in the city of Suva. We were taking petitions across to the French embassy at the time to protest things that were happening in French Polynesia and other places.
All right, I'll come back to protests in a moment. So which political party did you align yourself to when you really started taking, if I may call or say, active participation?
Sure. I mean, for me, it's always been the National Federation Party. I think that partly because I think I was brought up in the Western Division. Growing up, we really appreciated the multi-ethnic country around us. I grew up near sugarcane fields. I've gone to more pujas than church services. I think I could recite Hindu prayers off by heart. And I just, growing up in that situation in Nandi, just made me drawn to the beliefs and the values of the National Federation Party. So it's the party that I've always voted for.
All right. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is Ms. Lenora Qereqeretabua, National Federation Party Member of Parliament. Please share the SSTP page and this interview with family and friends if you can. Don't forget to like and follow the SSTP page as well. Let's look at the coup culture in Fiji, Lenora. When the 1987 coup happened, I think you mentioned, were you still in Canberra at that stage?
The 1987 coup, no, Sashi, we had just started work at the fledgling Fiji television.
Okay.
I remember very, very clearly that day, all of a sudden, cars were just speeding past the office, and we had no idea what was going on. Turned on the radio and heard that there had been a military coup. And we actually promptly got into one of the vans from Fiji television, cameramen, tapes, and so forth, and tried to go and get some footage from, from the areas that had been affected by the coup in the Suva's central business district.
How did that event, that 1987 coup, impact on you as a person?
I remember, first of all, I'd never seen so many uniforms. I had grown up in the Western side, and before coming to Suva, I had been living in Simatoka, where my father was the general manager or the managing director of sales at the time at the Shangri-La's Fijian Resort. So for me, just seeing that many military uniforms was daunting. But also at the same time was that 11-year-old kid's voice in the back of my head, just saying, where is the justice? Where is the fairness in this, in what's happening right now in Fiji? And of course, that was repeated again a few times, in the next decade.
Yes, you've just evoked memories in my own mind. On that day, I had just finished my breakfast show. When I came back from having breakfast, the coup had happened. Half an hour later, I sat in the FBC van to go and scout the city, and what met my eyes was absolutely devastating. Lenora, I've got to put up a picture here. In the lead up to in the aftermath of or rather before the 2000 coup, I've been sent a photograph. There were a lot of protest marches. A viewer, Nilesh Prakash, sent a photograph purporting, and I emphasize the word, purporting to show you in front line of a protest march. Let me put this picture up on the screen if I can, and ask you, were you ever actively involved in such a protest? The picture might not be that clear. Can you see that image?
Yes, I can see that, Sashi.
And the viewer who sent this photograph purported that that was you in the front line of the protest march. Is that Lenora in that picture?
No, definitely not, Sashi.
All right. Well, that's good enough for me. And that puts paid to any allegations that this viewer had put to me. And thank you for clearing that up very, very quickly. Still staying with the coup, we've discussed very briefly, and I don't want this to be a show on coups. We have so many other things to discuss. Let's move forward to the 2000 coup. Post-coup, what were your thoughts? I mean, the hostage crisis lasted something like 50-odd days. There was a lot of pre-action between the Ngarase government and the military camp. What were your thoughts post-coup?
In 2000, I had just left Communications Fiji Limited. I decided just to give up work for a few years or a few months and just, be a stay-at-home mom for my young daughter. So because I wasn't in tune with what was going on TV or on radio, I tended to take what was happening with the hostages, of course, was, devastating for them and their families and the country. But again, as I said, I had a lot of other things that were happening in my own personal life that I didn't really pay as much attention as perhaps I should have done post 2000 coup. But again, that that 11-year-old voice in the back of my head was starting to get louder and louder and louder, and it would continue to get louder even in the lead up to the 2006 coup. And then in 2017, when I decided to put my hand up and stand for public office.
I must apologize. I mentioned Mr. Ngare saying the 2000 coup. That, of course, was the event that removed the Chaudhry government. Coming to the 2006 coup, that is where a lot of media wars between the Ngare government and the military commander and the military. Your thoughts and take on this 2006 coup as another democratically elected government in Fiji was removed?
Well, by 2006, I was well and truly over this crap. I was starting to get very, very agitated about this seemingly a short memory that I thought we had as a people. I kept on saying, haven't we just gone through several of these things? How short is our memory? When are we going to get over this and just let the democratically elected government run the country the way it should be? That's the will of the people. Let them do their job. And if they do them badly, we'll vote them out. So by 2006, I think we were well and truly over it. And I definitely was too.
All right. And what effect do you think that the coup culture has had on the country?
Well, I mean, we've had so many discussions about this. So much we've had a lot of talk about this throughout the decades. But I think quite apart from the economic and reputational damage to Fiji, the effects of the coup on our psyche as a nation and behavior resulting from this militarization, I believe, has been partly to blame for the rise in violence in Fiji. Many Fijians love a uniform and we look up to a uniform, rightly or wrongly. But when a uniform is sometimes the perpetrator of violence against the very people it has sworn to protect, we have a major problem. A famous John Maxwell quote, if I may quote John Maxwell on leadership, is everything rises and falls on leadership. And I believe that whatever the leadership of a family unit or a community or a company or indeed a nation, it will reap what it sows. And I think when we look back at Fiji right now, we are reaping what we sowed.
Okay, and as you said, I think in 2017, you decided to put your hand up and join the NFP, the National Federation Party. What appealed to you about the NFP? Why the NFP?
Because of my identity as a girl who grew up in the Western Division, I think that was the first appeal. But also what had happened in 2017, Sashi, was I had been very, very vocal against government, or one of the departments had planned on using $35,000, less than 2 years after Tropical Cyclone Winston had devastated huge swathes of Fiji. And this department wanted to use $35,000 to welcome home the contingent from Fiji, including the Prime Minister coming back from Bonn, from COP23. And I thought, wow, $35,000 could be going to fix roofs of schools, to ensure that kids are not going into the 2018 school year still going to school in tents, or please fix the Ra Maternity Hospital, which was very, very badly damaged. So I took to social media, and a friend of mine said, why don't you use the hashtag cancel the party? So I wrote a letter to the editor and I urged people on social media, if you agree with what I'm saying, please lobby government to use this money in a better way to help alleviate the suffering brought upon us by Tropical Cyclone Winston. And it seemed to work, because all of a sudden I get a call from Legend FM News, and they asked, Lenora, would you have anything to say about what a particular permanent secretary had just said in the press conference? I said, I'm sorry, I'm standing in the bank. What did the permanent secretary say? And apparently the permanent secretary had said, it doesn't matter what Lenora says. Lenora Qereqeretabua said, we will have this party, or we'll have this welcoming home ceremony. And I thought, wow, I'm a civilian. I'm not political, not active anyway. And I've made a permanent secretary say my name publicly in a press conference. So I started thinking, so then I rang them back. At first I was like, no, it's okay. I don't have anything to say. But then standing in the bank, I thought, hang on a minute, I've been given this amazing opportunity, take it with both hands. So I got out of the queue, went outside, rang up the news desk, and I said, have you run the story yet? Can I still give you a comment? And they said, sure, give us a comment. So I commented and said, look, this is not a political statement. All I'm thinking of is the people that we could be using for $35,000 to help. And things progressed, and shortly after that, I got a call from the party to ask whether I was interested in standing for the party in the 2018 elections.
Which you did in the 2018 elections. Now, how difficult was it to contest the election in terms of campaign funding and getting your message out to the people, especially that the rules had changed because constituencies were removed and it was just one national constituency?
Yes, Sashi. So, sometimes, always, God moves in mysterious ways. And I went into the elections unprepared because it was the first time I had decided to be active politically. I knew that there was going to be a lot of demands on finances. And fortunately, I had some investments that I then needed to break. And I'm grateful for that question because I think a lot of people in Fiji don't understand the costs involved with becoming a political candidate and running for public office, especially, as you said, now that Fiji is just one constituency. So I remember somebody coming up to me after I put my hand up and I'd been named as a provisional candidate. Somebody came and said, so who's your campaign manager? And I said, me. Okay, and who's in your campaign team? I said, me. So it was kind of like that for me, Sashi, fledgling, the first time standing for public office. I was very blessed. And I think this is an important thing for those who are wanting to stand for the first time in the 22 elections need to think about is that your public profile is very, very important. I'm very blessed in 2018 that I had been, on radio, on TV. People saw my face and knew who I was. That is not going to be the case for every political candidate in the next elections. And so I was very naive. And, I'd get a call from a far-flung part of Fiji where a friend would say, hey, my mother's asking whether you're going to come to us or not. So I spent thousands of dollars taking a few other candidates with me to go and campaign in that area. But I've learned my lesson since then, and I'm going to be better managed in 2022.
You mentioned personal sacrifices like breaking some investments that you had. So casting your mind back to 2018 elections, the personal sacrifice financially, roughly how much would Lenora have spent of her own money into her campaign funds? Because as you said, sometimes I believe people in Fiji just take it for granted and they don't realize the personal sacrifices in terms of being away from family, the time spent on the road, the printing of perhaps pamphlets, banners, and things like that. And all these go towards expenses in campaigns. So what was your financial sacrifice like, if I may ask that, and if it's not too personal?
No, it's absolutely not personal at all, Sashi. I will very honestly say I spent in excess of $50,000 in the 2018 elections. And that's because, I was traveling to Taviuni, Naitasiri, Vonolevu, Kandavu. And, when you go to communities, they want to have grog because the grog will, help the conversations move along and so forth. And also because I didn't ask for money. I did not fundraise. I thought I did not have the capital yet to be able to ask people to give me money. Perhaps it'll be easier now that I've been in Parliament for 3.5 years. But in 2018, as a first-time parliamentarian or first-time candidate, I could not see myself asking people for money when I wasn't sure whether I was going to get a seat or not.
Well, we'll discuss certain issues of campaigning later on in the program, but I find it a bit funny, I guess. You mentioned, part of your expenses, as you say, travel to Tavyuni, buy grog, etc., to have those meetings, etc. I guess in today's political world, if you bought grog for your campaign, some might construe that as a bribe. But we'll
Mm.
discuss that later on because the Electoral Act now speaks of a lot of different things. Now, Lenora, more interested, what was your platform for the 2018 elections? Noting we've got a national constituency, what message do you take to the country?
Well, in 2018, I was one of the things that really was bothering me then was the number of women in parliament and also waste management in Fiji and generally the environment and the state of our environment and how we just continue to disrespect the world around us in terms of environment, Sashi. So it was those two themes that were the main thrust behind my campaign was trying to get more women into parliament and also trying to get people to be thinking about where their rubbish goes, how much rubbish they produce.
Now, we all know you were successful, made it into parliament as NFP's third parliamentarian. How would you describe that initial experience in that parliamentary term? What was that like for you? Just generally first, and then I'll break it down.
It's very exciting, very fulfilling as well when you have people that you've never met before message you, call you, and say, "Hey, thank you for that speech. You said something that we've been wanting to tell our government." Or people come up to me and say, "Hey, can you bring this up in parliament next time you sit?" It's been very fulfilling knowing that you can be a mouthpiece for those who don't have the opportunity to have that platform.
And what about challenges? What challenges did you face in your first term in parliament?
Oh, challenges. Let's see. Trying to let the negativity run off, like a drop of water off a roro leaf. That is one of the things that is quite challenging in Parliament or as a parliamentarian is trying not to absorb the negativity, trying to leave the negativity where it should stay as far away as possible. Because as a parliamentarian and right now in Fiji's context, it's tough on your mental health. Going in there and into an arena that is quite toxic, can be quite misogynistic, and really can be quite negative. So my mental health, I had to really keep a close eye on my mental health, the words that came out of my mouth, asking God for forgiveness every night and just asking for strength to be able to go back into parliament and again face the same people and bang, bang, bang on the issues that are important to Fijians.
Wow. I find that amazing because you're one of the first persons to ever say about your own mental health,
Mm,
being in that dog pit or that pit and
yes.
being faced with so many different challenges, barrages, and everything else. I'm glad you've mentioned that. Now, you used the word misogynistic. Women in parliament, in Fiji's parliament, I was shocked some time back when I saw on video and heard a minister of the Fiji First government describe a female member's dress. Now, that kind of behavior or attitude, how does that make you feel?
I I think I would be speaking as well on behalf of that woman parliamentarian to say what it does. It puts steel in our spines and fire in our blood.
Wow, well said. And I hope to be speaking to that woman in question someday soon. Um, Let me say, views of that nature, misogynistic views, if they were expressed in an Australian parliament for that matter, there would be an absolute uproar in the House, and the Speaker would be forced to take measures. In the example I've just given, why do you not think that the speaker in Fiji did not take stringent measures?
I cannot recall exactly the words that were spoken in Parliament, but I would I think the parliamentarian in question rose on a point of order about that comment. Um, I don't know. I think you'd have to ask the speaker, Sashi.
All right, fair enough. I can accept that. Now, there's an irony here. On one side, we have the Prime Minister speaking of gender balance, speaking on things in Fiji that women should be empowered, etc. And yet, then you have from his own party misogynistic attitudes being expressed in Fiji's parliament. Um, how does one reconcile such hypocrisy?
Oh, I think I think I'll maybe just hop onto education then. I know
All
we're
right,
going
we'll
to
come
talk
to that.
about education, but I think that is a very important part of the education of children is tolerance, understanding how to speak to one another when you disagree, having respect for one another despite your sex. And I think that's one thing that perhaps some kids were taught and some kids were not taught, and maybe some of these guys that are in Parliament were not taught that.
I
Basically, I
don't.
cannot understand why somebody would say something like that.
Well, I'm sure. Look, we'll talk about education separately because you recently gave a speech at your national convention, and there's certain aspects of your speech that I want to discuss with you today.
Sure.
Now, I don't buy that at all, and I'm not disrespecting you in any way. We were all taught manners, respect for our fellow human beings. And if Parliament denigrates itself to such behavior, then something else is absolutely wrong. Look, I respect your thoughts. Let us look at parliamentary standards. Recently, while Professor Biman Prasad, your party leader, was speaking in Parliament, the Prime Minister told him to shut up. This is definitely not in keeping with good parliamentary standards, particularly coming from the leader of the government side. If I may ask you, what are your views when you see such boorish behavior or display in Parliament? Were you in Parliament on that particular day?
Yes, I was, Sashi. I was sitting next to Professor Biman Prasad. And, I really admire the strength that he had because he just continued and, was pointing across the floor, telling the Prime Minister, don't tell me to shut up, don't tell me to shut up. But it is sad when Parliament sittings are on. Oftentimes, some of us would go onto the Parliament Facebook page to see what people are saying about what we are saying in Parliament. And it is sad to say that a lot of viewers who are watching the parliamentary debates think we're a circus, think I'm working in a circus, think it's, an animal farm, think it's, we behave, quote unquote, behaving worse than children, but children don't even behave in such a way. But when people are acting in such a boorish way, I think it says a lot about us as a nation. Again, when adults cannot agree to disagree and do so in a civilized manner, it just means something's lacking. We've lost something along the way in our journey as a country, Sashi, and that's one of the reasons that I'm really hopeful that things will change after the next elections.
It's called civility. Civility is what's lacking. I mean, it's in black and white. Let's call a spade a spade. Pure civility and respect for fellow human being, fellow member of parliament is what's lacking. Now, I'm going to ask you this question, and I asked you about the speaker a moment ago, and I totally understand why you would deflect such a question. Given that example where the Prime Minister told Professor Biman Prasad to shut up, do you think the Prime Minister should have been taken to task on that occasion by the Speaker, either by being asked to apologize or asked to be removed from Parliament for a while to contemplate his utterance, should the Prime Minister have been taken to task by the Speaker?
I think so. I think so. I mean, we've watched, New Zealand parliamentary sittings, Australian parliamentary sittings, the House of Commons in the UK, where the Speaker is much more forceful in his rulings, and he's hitting that gavel and telling people, order in a very loud voice, and people listen to the Speaker in a real parliament, in a real democracy.
That is why I raised that, because, like you say, in most Western democratic governments, when parliamentarians mention words that are derogatory or sometimes which maligns their fellow parliamentarian, speakers take very, very strict action, and an apology is called for. Lenora is still sticking to parliamentary matters. In recent times, as you are aware, and I'm referring now to Standing Order 51. I believe it's a bloody joke. Opposition parties in Fiji have all condemned the manner in which Standing Order 51 has been implemented and used. What are your views on the speedy passing of bills in Parliament? I mean, how does a parliamentarian come to terms with a bill in just a matter of hours, and that too when the bill is presented late in the night and you're supposed to digest that and be present in Parliament the next morning to debate and pass the bill?
Thank you, Sashi. Yes, I mean, there is a place and a time for Standing Order 51. Say if there was a national emergency and something had to be, we had to move funds from one seg to another to help with an emergency. But yes, Standing Order 51 has been overused and abused in Fiji's parliament. And one of the biggest problems we have with Standing Order 51 is the lack of consultation with stakeholders when bills are passed through Parliament, sometimes almost overnight, as you just said, presented in Parliament late at night and expected to be debated and passed the next morning. That just cuts out the access of stakeholders to discussion surrounding the implications of any bill that is brought before Parliament under Standing Order 51.
Yes, it leaves a lot to be desired. Like you say, it just lacks consultation. And even if you take consultation out of the equation, it just lacks a common sense attitude of at least brainstorming the issue within your parliamentary caucus to go forth and debate it in a vigorous manner. Now, looking at major areas of concern in Fiji, what do you think are the major areas or issues of concern that is currently of significant concern to the population? I'd like you to list them, and then we'll take it one by one, because I've got questions for you on health, on education, and other issues like poverty, etc.
Okay, Sashi, I just wanted to know, can you hear the band outside
No,
this
I
room?
can't.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I kept turning off my microphone because it's rather loud. Okay, first thing I think is the most important thing for people in Fiji is putting food on the table. It's bread and butter issues. We can talk about policy until the cows come home, but for the majority of Fijians, they want to be able to put decent food on the table for their children. They want to be able to get to a decent job on time that pays decent wages so they can live in a decent home. That, unfortunately, are the most important things for Fijians right now, Sashi. Quite
You've
apart
summed it
from
up.
health,
Mm.
education, and so forth.
You've summed that up so nicely, because those are the basic amenities of life. And you've just, hit that hole in one. Now, Lenora, in your speech at the NFP convention on the 2nd of April, you gave a speech, and the title was Holding Up the Torch. And with your permission, if I may, please, I'd like to quote a couple of passages from your speech. May I do that? I can't hear you.
Certainly,
Yes,
Sashi.
okay. I thought your microphone was switched off. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let me quote from the speech. As I said, it was titled "Holding Up the Torch," and this was delivered by Lenora at the National Federation Party convention on the 2nd of April. And I quote: "Today, I will resist the temptation to turn this valuable opportunity into a rant piece against the Fiji First government. Instead, allow me to begin by asking this party, as John Kennedy did, to dedicate every effort of our minds and spirits to lead this party to victory and this nation to greatness. I believe that there is nothing greater or nobler a political party can do than to dedicate itself to making better this country that we love and live to serve. The truth is, the way to root out darkness is not to complain about the dark, it is to hold up a torch. That is what I intend to do here today. Holding up a torch means making tough decisions. It means doing things that are sometimes unpopular. It means sticking by your principles when all around us people are trading theirs. Let me get back to vision. I believe that dealing with the challenges affecting our nation can be made better if we start by focusing on two priorities: education and health. Let me say that again: education and health. End of quote. Wow, Lenora, that was wonderfully said. I love that, holding up the torch to clear that darkness. Let us discuss the following. Let's begin with health. What are your views on the status of the health facilities in Fiji?
Oh gosh, Sashi, there's not a week goes past that I don't get a call from somebody who has been affected by the lack of resources, mostly in our health sector. You've heard, I'm sure, Mr. Tikonduandua, Honorable Pio Tikonduandua, talk about or use the analogy of the broken hospital door when he talks about the health system in Fiji. And it's a physical hospital door that he saw when he was going to CWM for his reviews. There is, gosh, where do we start? When I brought up the subject of dialysis and dialysis treatment for kidney patients in Parliament last year, I was called a liar. I was called a liar by the Minister for Health, who said that everything was working and everything was was hunky dory. He was then proven wrong by a nephrologist in Fiji who's working in private practice. But the whole health system, I think, Sashi, we've been concentrating too much on curative health and not preventative health. And I speak as the daughter of a former health sister, who spent almost every day of her working life going from house to house, checking on whether they had a saijan tree in the back, where the mbele plantation is close to the house so they could just send the kids out to get mbele. And I think in the last few years, we've lost sight of the preventative side of the health of the people. And we've been concentrating so much on keeping people alive with curative health. And I think if we as a country started to go back to how we used to eat, the olden days when you would have, I think some farmers went out. Whoa, I think the
That's
power
okay.
was cut out here in the hotel and just came back on again.
Okay.
I don't want to talk about the negative side of the health of the health facilities in Fiji for too long. But what I would really rather talk about is what can we do to better the health of our people, to keep us healthy, so we don't need to go to hospital and then complain about the lack of resources. And I think that would be a great place where we could start the conversation, as we head to the elections, is encouraging people to start eating again from from your garden, starting to encourage people to have home gardens, which I think was the thing during the worst parts of COVID, when people had lost jobs. But back to our health facilities, you will hear from the health minister that the Mba Hospital is a fantastic place to be in now. I've heard different from residents of Mba who've been calling me last week. Just had a conversation recently with Mr. Kumar, who requires 3 sessions of dialysis every week just to stay alive. And the poor man said to me the last time I spoke to him, he said, I only get $6,000 a year. I've told my family and I've told my wife, look, I will only get as many dialysis treatments as I can afford a week. After that, you can just have to let me go and let me die. I mean, for a guy to say that, for a husband to say that to his wife is I just can't
It's
wrap my head
heartbreaking.
around that. There are people
Absolutely
in this
heartbreaking.
country that have to make that choice, a conscious choice to tell their families, I can't afford dialysis, let me die. And I think that is a real reflection of where we stand as a country in terms of our health facilities.
But you would have views, I'm sure, of how things got this bad. I mean, look, when we were growing up in the 60s and 70s,
Mm.
we would go to the hospital, we'd get treated. But over the last so many years, things have just totally, totally deteriorated. So my question is, how did things get this bad?
I think there's been a real disconnect, Sashi. Again, it's just that have we been listening? Have we been listening to the people in the hospitals? Have we been listening to the permanent secretaries, to the directors of the different parts of the Ministry of Health when they come and tell us, look, we need help in this area, we need help in this area? I mean, I take, for example, the groundbreaking ceremony shortly before the 2018 elections for the then was going to be the new CWM maternity unit. The groundbreaking happened before the 2018 elections. We're now on the eve of the 2022 elections, and nothing's happened there. So it's just all these a litany of broken promises just littering the path behind us, and this needs to change. It's just this complacent leadership. You come to Parliament and you tell Parliament that everything's fine. Your staff are sitting in the hospital and you can probably see the sky through the holes in the roof. And they're saying, what are you talking about? Have you been here lately? And that's happened to me recently where I was in a hospital, one of the rural hospitals, and I walked in because I was just interested. I happened to be in the area and I was interested. And I walked in and I looked around and I said to the sister in charge, when was the last time the minister was here? Have you told, your subdivisional medical officers about all the issues you're going through? And she said, yes, but there's only so much we can do. We raise the issues, it gets raised up, and then nothing happens. Nothing happens until it's on the eve of the elections and we start making promises that we will have, 24/7 heart operations in Lotoko Hospital. I mean, we just had power cuts in the central division most of today. We've got water coming out of an old pipe just on the end of my street. So the whole of Samambula has been suffering low pressure since this morning. So there is this huge disconnect between what we say we will do and what we do end up saying or do end up doing, Sashi.
It just seems, listening to you, Lenora, it just seems that, and pardon me for using these words, I need to be as blunt as I can. It just seems to me that there's a whole lot of bullshit being thrown around. You know, people cannot call a spade a spade. In the confines of Parliament, there's a whole lot of bull being thrown around, and the reality on the ground level is that the common man suffers.
Yes.
Now, in some other countries, with the standard of the current health system that we've got all over the country, there would be a bloody revolt. But because of so many sanctions, so many acts of Parliament that just stops people from even having a peaceful protest march.
Yes.
These are sanctions. I mean, I'm sure, people would march to seek better hospital treatment, but it's a whole lot of bull that's being thrown about. You think I'm on the right track here?
Absolutely on the right track, Sashi. That is absolutely right. It is bloody frustrating. It is bloody frustrating to go into parliament and then be told that, everything's working fine and this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And then people call us. We have civil servants who, us, are angry enough to be able to stop us in the streets and say, thank you for saying that. That this is happening in my department. We can't talk about it too publicly because, there's the slang in Fiji. I'll be 55 tomorrow, which is retirement age. So, it's just the health system in Fiji. Again, I talk about preventative. We should be stressing preventative rather than the curative, but we haven't, which is why there's so much need for curative health in Fiji. And I think we just really need to rethink across the public health of the region, is talking about life stage approaches, because I see primary school kids eating dry noodles out of a packet. They open the MSG and the flavor thing, drop it in, smash the noodles, and they're eating that on their way to school, on their way home from school. I've seen a lot of children in town who are very malnourished, and when people say, oh, you just plant pombele, well, that's easy to say when you have a huge plot of land. But when you live in an informal settlement with no tenure on the land on which your home is built, you don't know when the owner of the land is going to come and say, move. When people are poor, the things that they want to spend money on is very, very different from those of us who are sitting in parliament. I see children selling pies and selling handicrafts outside the major supermarkets in Fiji. That should not be happening in 2022 in Fiji. If we had the boom, if we had the unprecedented, economic growth that we hear so often, stunting and malnourishment in our children, then affecting their brains and their ability to learn properly, affecting them into high school and then into university. And then they are the workforce that we are hoping to build this nation. So from the very beginning, we've got problems.
Well, in the interest of transparency, let me tell my viewers that I have extended an invitation to the Minister for Health. I've not received a reply. I had also extended an invitation to the Permanent Secretary for Health, and that was towards the end of the COVID heightened alerts in Fiji. I received a 1 or 2 line response from his staff to acknowledge that they had received my email and that they would get back to me soon. I'm still waiting. Mr. Fong, if you are one of the viewers, tell Mr. Fong I'm still waiting for a response. Now, I'm not going to ask you about government matters, Mr. Fong, or Minister for Health. I'll talk about health issues. So please take up the challenge, but I'm not surprised I have not got any response. Lenora, we could sit here all day talking about health, but in that speech of yours, you mentioned another vision of education.
Yeah.
Pray do tell, what is it about education that really moves you, or what would you like to see?
Yeah, thank you, Sashi. We talk about free education, and I did say in my speech that free education does not mean quality education, and the NFP has made a commitment that if we get into government, when we get into government, we must have a whole of the education sector stakeholders talk, and I think that's what we lack doing in Fiji, is listening to one another. Government is not the expert. The opposition is not the expert. The experts are the teachers. They are the early childhood educators. They are the high school teachers, the people in the Ministry of Education. Those are the experts, the parents, the students themselves. They should be telling government how to formulate the curriculum, how to formulate the different stages of education. Take for example, one country that always inspires awe in me is Japan, and early childhood education in Japan. Even the meals that they serve as school lunches in Japan. One thing I would love to see in our schools in Fiji, Sashi, is an equal playing field across the board. I want to see Natusara Primary School, which is on the island of Ono, to be exactly the same standard as perhaps one of the primary schools in Suva, well funded with computers. And one thing we should be also thinking about is, are we developments in science and technology that is to come, or are we still teaching them the same thing that we were 25 years, 30 years, 50 years ago? So we just need to be thinking much further down the line. And there's a lot of freebies being thrown around, and I don't doubt that many parents and many families have benefited from free education. But in my heart of hearts, I believe that to really, really appreciate something, you've got to earn the money to pay for that. If I walk into someone's house and I know that they're house proud because they've worked very hard for the home that they have, the furniture that they've got, it's different from walking into a house perhaps where the person living there hasn't paid for anything, so doesn't really care how they treat the things around them. I don't know if you get my meaning, but I know that free education has benefited a lot of people, but I also believe that if you want something that's quality, we need to be able to pay for it. And I think that's where we need that stakeholder engagement from the whole of the education sector. Students, teachers, people in the Ministry of Education, they need to be listened to, and we need to take advice from them.
I like that, your concept of an equal playing field. I love that vision which you've just described. Now, unfortunately, it just seems that even in the education sector, it's it's like the command from the top being given. So it's somebody who's sitting at the top, be it the minister or whosoever. It's all of a sudden, I mean, let's face it, removing computer labs in all schools. I mean, where was the strategic study done for that? Who's going to supply? Don't answer me. I'm just ranting. Who's going to supply the tablets? Where is it going to be sourced from? Is it going to be tendered? Who's going to pay for it? How long is that warranty? What happens if the tablet goes out of sync in 2 years, as most mobile phones slow down after 2.5 years? What is going to happen? Who's going to pay for it? I mean, these things just boggle the mind, and it just wonders where sometimes the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, or vice versa. What do you think? I said don't answer, but I must give you that opportunity.
It's funny, I actually met somebody from the Ministry of Education yesterday when I was in town, and they just came right up to me, and they know me personally. So they said, "Man, I tell you," what were the exact words? The exact words were, "Dismantling the computer labs? What is it? Her father's computer lab? Did her father pay for the computer labs?" This is the kind of anger that we're seeing on social media, as well as from people who run schools, who have invested in their children's education by being involved in the school community. So yeah, it's just like it's like a real top down. It's like, you will do what I tell you. I say jump, you just ask me how high, and you just do what I tell you to do. Just no listening, no consultation, no acceptance that I might not know everything, and I should really be asking the teachers, the staff, the parents, the students, what is best for them.
One of the beauties of island life and growing up back home, one of the beauties was that we always spoke. There was dialogue. And it just seems that all of a sudden, dialogue is just thrown out with the bathwater out of the window. And like you say, it's top heavy. When I say jump, ask me how high. sad state of affairs. Now, staying with education, um, speaking of our young people, how do you think our young University of the South Pacific students are being affected with the government holding back the 60 odd million dollars in terms of the funds? Surely there would be some adverse effect on these young minds, our future leaders of tomorrow.
Right. Well, I mean, goodness knows how many, programs have had to be put on the back burner for lack of funding, Sashi. While the Minister for Economy says, money's coming into the university via, that tells the students that have got scholarships. But that is not, he's just totally missing the mark, and perhaps on purpose too, because there are projects that I believe are going to be put on the back burner. Students who could have done different projects at university now going to have to wait just because the university doesn't have money. But what I think the government seems to have forgotten is that the University of the South Pacific is a very important bunch of people. These are academics. These are young minds that are going to form policies for Fiji and the region and indeed the world in the near future. And you're starting off their tertiary education by withholding funds because of some personal vendetta against a gentleman who has done nothing to harm you or nothing to harm the country or the region is just it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing, and I know that the diplomatic community in Fiji are looking on with great interest, and they have been very, very diplomatic when we talk about the USB saga, but they also understand the problems that this will cause for students of Fiji, never mind the region.
Well, it has political ramifications, and it just has to be observed that USP students, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of voting numbers, I believe they are something like 20,000 plus in terms of voting numbers. So
Yes.
students, take heed.
Yeah, very
All
true,
right.
Sashi.
You mentioned that one of your platforms in 2018 was also waste management, etc. I'd like to now talk about environmental issues. How important are environmental issues to the people of Fiji, and do you think this should be a growing concern?
Absolutely. Everything starts at home, Sashi, and this is my own experience. I remember as a young child, Dad was driving, and my brother Sikirsa and I were in the back seat, and yarning with my father, and all of a sudden he says, "Oh my!" Said something, so I'm very angry. And what had happened was a family driving in the car in front of us had just thrown a plastic bag of rubbish, and this is going back to the 70s, out their window. So Dad overtakes this car, stops his car, our car, in the middle of the road, gets out, and tells that man to get out of his car, go back and go and pick up the rubbish and take it home with him. This was my first, and as a child growing up, my parents were very, very, very particular about not littering. Put the rubbish in the bin where it's supposed to go. I have been driving down Nasese. This is a couple of years ago. Driving down the road, a school bus passes me going in the opposite direction, a Nasese bus, and this kid hurls an empty Coca-Cola bottle out the window and hits my windscreen. And I thought, my goodness, this child, I don't know what this child has been taught at home, if he or she has been taught anything at all about littering. But again, this is what I talk about when we talk about, health and manners and littering in Fiji, is what are we teaching our kids? What are kids seeing the adults do? I have joined a few groups in Suva, picking up rubbish along the Namukolo Creek, up the Wailanda River in Lami. And I've just recently joined the Suva Harbour Foundation in trying to see where the rubbish is coming from, what we can do as a location in stopping the rubbish from coming from homes, down creeks, and into the river. Of course, we've got a beautiful bay here in Suva. We've got beautiful environment around the country, but they are just littered with rubbish. Say, I'll take Wainandoi, for example, a favorite picnic place for a lot of people from Suva, Navua. And the residents of Wainandoi are just up to their eyeballs, get so sick and tired of the people that go to Wainandoi and leave their dirty diapers, leave their beer bottles. Some of them even smash beer bottles. They think it's funny to throw beer bottles at the rocks in the river, leaving shards of glass to injure the kids that use Wainandoi as their creek every day because they live in the area. So this is just this lack of civic pride that I see in many of us. I want people to see this country as a beautiful place that we have been given, we have been honored to be placed upon, and we are supposed to be wardens, we're supposed to be superintendents, we're supposed to be the people that have been put in this country, on this land, to look after, God's soil and the bounty of the sea. But when we're damaging it for ourselves and for the future generation, I think there needs to be just a huge sea change in the curriculum in education. We need to be spending a lot more time making our kids conscious of the world around them.
It starts at the home, as you say. Young children emulate their parents. Young children follow what their parents do. And if parents, for example, go to that picnic spot in Wainandoi, and if they leave all their rubbish and crap behind, you're just educating your children to do the same. So as you say, it starts from the home. And that kind of look, Fiji is a beautiful, beautiful country. It's got some of the best beaches in the world. It's some areas are absolutely pristine, and it's a traveler's gold mine, so to say. But as you say, we've got to preserve it. We've got to clean our own backyard. Nobody's going to come and do it. And here in Australia, we have laws in place, council laws, and there are very stringent fines. If you go to a park, a national park, or a picnic spot, and if you do not throw your garbage in the garbage bins provided or take it back home with you, and if you're caught, well, you'll face a very, very hefty fine. Moving on.
And we have laws here in Fiji, we have good laws. It's just the enforcement that's not there. And when there's no enforcement, no one's watching you, fire, put your rubbish wherever you want to put it.
Now, when I spoke with you just a few days back, you mentioned to me about the old capital Levuka and about the heritage sites. Now, obviously, UNESCO has listed a number of buildings in the old capital Levuka as a heritage site. Now, what is the status of these heritage designated buildings today?
Oh gosh, they are in a very, very sad state, Sashi. Very, very sad state. Even the deed of cession stone at Nasova in Levuka, on Ovalau, it's just been no resources put towards the upkeep of these sites. And I think last year the director of the Department of Heritage and Arts was saying that Fiji was starting to fail to meet the UNESCO guidelines and the mechanisms, when we were not following the mechanisms to stay on the list of heritage sites. So it's a bit of a worry because, we're wanting to attract tourists to, parts of Fiji that we know tourists will want to see. And we know that there are a section of the traveling public, the tourists, who want to visit heritage sites. And if we don't look after our heritage sites, these will be gone in a few years' time. With the borders opening, when the borders were closed, it would have been a great opportunity to have renovated the heritage homes, the heritage places, the heritage sites on Levuka, to have them ready for tourism. There is another problem there, though, that the wharf in Levuka was damaged badly during Tropical Cyclone Winston, and it hasn't been fixed since then. So, we're trying to attract tourism to the old capital. But how are the cruise boats going to send their tenders in if part of the jetty is not safe? So there's just a long list, Sashi, of things that we really need to be dedicated to. And when we say we're going to do something, we've got to do it. The roads on Levuka. Oh gosh, I've got a friend here who lives partly on Levuka and also in Suva. I used to work with him at the Bank of New Zealand a long time ago. And he's a prolific letter writer about the state of Overlau and the state of Levuka town. And it was funny, a couple of days ago when the Australian Governor General was here, there were a couple of letters to the editor in the Fiji Times that said, we wish the Governor General had come to Levuka because everything would have been fixed all of a sudden in Levuka, including the mortuary at the Levuka Hospital, which has not been working perfectly for quite some time. And there have been issues with bodies being kept there, getting a bit too warm.
Wow. It certainly seems that Levuka itself is in a state of neglect, because if you can say that the Levuka Wharf, which was damaged during Cyclone Winston, still has not been fixed. Recently in one of the programs I put up, I think it was a program with the Honorable Pio Tikunduandua, I put up a photograph of a road in Levuka, and he knew exactly which road that was. Mm-hmm. Potholes as big as moon craters, absolutely, disgusting, so to say. Lenora, move on. Let us look at the incidence of HIV and AIDS in Fiji. Mm. Is this a growing concern in Fiji? And if so, what is being done to combat this?
Well, Sashi, I was involved with HIV and AIDS, towards the beginning of when HIV and AIDS was being highlighted as something that we should all be worried about in Fiji. This is, going back a few decades. But I understand from some of my friends within the HIV AIDS circles that oh, hang on a minute. Let me just get my facts right. Last year, the Ministry of Health reported 95 new cases from January to October. And this was when there was no active screening. And these new cases, stakeholders believe indicate weak prevention from earlier years presenting themselves during lockdown. Unfortunately, perhaps due to COVID, perhaps not, and I think this started before COVID, outreach programs have been scaled down, and civil society partners have not been receiving the kind of support that they usually get for awareness activities. And this was well before COVID. There's limited resources for STI and HIV hubs to carry out awareness programs. There's limited staffing. There's problems with supply of ARV stocks, the medication. And apparently since 2018, there's a key laboratory position for viral load testing that's been vacant. And this is really affecting how HIV positive people can be serviced and helped to get over the most serious parts of the sickness. But next month, actually this month, in a couple of weeks' time, I will be attending a candlelight vigil that'll be held. It's a global date, but it'll be a candlelight vigil for HIV and AIDS, and I'm sure to get a lot more information there. But one thing now that I think is a growing concern with HIV and AIDS is now that there's higher incidences of drug use in the country, people injecting drugs, sharing needles again is going to become a major problem when we're trying to prevent the transmission of HIV.
Lenora, have a break, have a drink of water or juice, and let me just say, when we were talking about heritage sites in Levuka, let me share this, that heritage declared sites overseas are national treasures and governments spend a lot of time and resources to maintain the heritage sites for future generations. And if we're talking about good old Levuka town, my God, that could be a gem of a place for tourists to visit, the old capital, and a short boat ride from Natovi, a short trip from road from Suva to Natovi on the boat to the old capital, spend a night there, walk around, visit, and the friendly, smiling faces of our people in the old capital. Visit my friend Mahesh in his barber shop, and you probably see Jimmy Subedas there as well. Okay, moving on. One of my pet hates, and I'm sure this would be yours as well, because you live through this on a daily basis, even today. We hear in the news of just about daily water cuts, never ending electricity disruptions. Look, I mean, it's a silly question to ask, but how bad is the situation in reality? I mean, I read Fiji News every day. I mean, please answer. How bad is it?
It is pretty bad, Sashi, because I think what's been happening is we've been tar sealing the roads, the roads that have been tar sealed and fixed, and everything looks fantastic. Some of the roads in Suva were fixed very quickly over the last couple of weeks, probably in preparation for the Governor General's visit. But underneath the surface, all is not well. And we've got very old infrastructure, which I understand. Mr. Usamate continues to talk about old infrastructure. But my question is, you've been running government for quite a number of years now. Why haven't you fixed that? And I think that is the question that is on everyone's lips. Today in Suva, we've had water cuts in Samambula. As I said, there's digging happening at the end of my street, and also with the power cuts. Power's been going on and off all day. I think the question that we just keep asking government, is where are the results of the so-called Mbaini Marama boom? If there was such a thing, why haven't the aged infrastructure been fixed before we start tar sealing the roads? Because if we want to go back in there and fix those water pipes, old water pipes, sewerage lines, and so forth, we're going to have to cut open those roads again. So just begs the question, what are our priorities? Just what's on the surface, what people can see, or will we get down to brass tacks and fix the rot that is underneath this smooth surface? And I'm talking about more than just roads.
You mentioned priority. It just seems that priorities are ranked in just a total reverse order. Priorities are not ranked in the way they ought to. I mean, if millions of dollars can be spent on other things, such as sponsorship, rather than being diverted to, say, a water pump or whatever it is, I mean, why cannot the water supply system, the pumps, etc., be budgeted and be accounted for in the budget, and a total revamp takes place? Which brings me to the question, and I want you to think carefully, because under Section 116, I don't want to get you into trouble. Perhaps just a general yes or no or an answer. I don't want to spoil your aspirations. I'm sure your party has addressed how they, together with the People's Alliance, if they form government, that you will tackle these issues of water and electricity, two main utilities, quickly. Yeah?
Well, the thing is, the first thing we have to do is to listen and then make the decisions that have to be made. And as I said in my speech in the convention, holding up that torch means having to make some difficult decisions that may not be popular at first, but in the state that this country is in, I think some unpopular decisions are going to have to be made so that we can fix the different problems one at a time. We can't have all the ministers going, yes, we're going to fix all the problems. We're going to fix all the hospitals, including and then we're going to fix all the roads and we're going to fix all the water pipes. Where's the money going to come from? That's the thing. So, the next government has definitely got its work cut out for it.
So do you think the problem lies in the personnel, or is it a money issue? Is that the problem, or is it a combination of management, decision-making, and available funds and resources?
All of the above, Sashi, all of the above, because, you can come into Parliament on the eve of an election and say, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. When the piggy bank is probably empty, the people who are going to be actually doing the work are asking, okay, that sounds lovely, but how are we going to do that when you don't give us the funds that we need to be able to carry out the changes? So it's all of the above. But it starts again with, just leadership and being transparent and honest with the questions that the public wants to know through the opposition.
You're watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Our chief guest this afternoon is Ms. Lenora Qereqeretabua, Member of Parliament for the National Federation Party. Please like and follow the SSTP page. And if you can, please share this interview with your family and friends. And let me remind you that you can watch a recording of this program on Facebook at a later time, or even on YouTube. The program goes live on Sundays on Facebook and on YouTube at the same time. Lenora, poverty is a huge, huge problem in Fiji. The poverty levels have been around 30%, with some experts putting the figure as high as 40 or 50%. However, big news this week, the World Bank has revised the figures down from 29.9% to 24.1%. The World Bank has stated that the revised figure was because of a discrepancy identified by its Poverty and Equity Global Practice team. My question to you is, forget the numbers, forget the percentages for a moment. What is the reality on the ground in terms of the poverty crisis in Fiji?
Yes. What we see every day, it's more important than the numbers. You're right. The numbers are there, but what we see every day in terms of poverty in Fiji, Sashi, is very, very, very sad. Increasingly there are elderly people who are now looking after their grandchildren because of broken marriages with their children, or children going away to go and look for work in other places far away from the grandparents. And I'm seeing increasingly grandparents having to look after their young grandchildren. And the poverty is not just in the rural areas. People tend to say, or maybe some people think that the poverty is in the rural areas, but in many ways the poverty is right here, right a couple of streets down from where I am right now, where they probably don't have flushed water. They're living in an informal settlement. They don't have any tenure. They have to work 2-3 jobs perhaps just to put food on the table. The high cost of living, yes, that is a given. And yes, we are seeing that happening right around the world. I think Nikhil was just talking about the interest rates and inflation in Australia being the highest in a long, long time. And it's the same is happening around the country, around the world. But in terms of Fiji, where we're a small country, where there is a lot of land that we could be using to be feeding people better food, it's really sad that we have so many children who are malnourished. Yes, we can talk about financial literacy and security. How many young Fijians are financially secure? How many are able to save money given the high cost of living and low wages? The financial literacy support for students. There was a big push towards financial literacy in schools a few years ago, but this has to continue right through primary school, into secondary school, even into tertiary, because while some sectors of Fiji's community, and by that I mean the Indo-Fijian sector, perhaps the Chinese part of Fiji's society, have known about money and the wise use of money and savings for generations, for thousands of years. For Itauke Fijians, this is not something that is part of our culture and our tradition. And I think it's something that our leaders need to continue to speak about. Those who know how to be successful, it'll be great if they could be sharing their knowledge. It'll be great if we wanted them to come and talk to us about how did you save so much money, but that goes towards the subject of poverty. But when you don't have a job, when you've lost your job, when you've got mouths to feed, when you've got relatives that are living with you because they don't have a decent home of their own, being financially secure and saving money just flies out the window in favor of, can we just feed the kids this morning? What are we having for lunch? Are we going to have dinner, or is it just going to be the kids that are going to eat and the adults, just have water and flour? And this is, again, something that has been happening. There's a family that some people I know have been trying to support, an elderly couple looking after their grandchildren. And at the time when these people went to go and visit them to take them some shopping, the old people actually just burst into tears because all they had was a cup of flour, and they were just going to boil water and mix the flour in the water and have that as their meal. And there's a lot of great people, Sashi, right now that are helping Fijians, and I have to mention people like, Alan Lockington and Narayan Reddy. There are people in the Northern Division around Suva, helping hands that are just, gathering support, sponsorships, just going out of their way. There are lots of people that we don't know about, that don't advertise and don't talk about it on social media, but are doing an amazing job in trying to feed people. And, we can say, you give a person a fish, you feed them for one day, you teach them how to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. But right now in Fiji, with the problems that we're facing on so many levels, that's easier said than done. So for those of people that are going out and feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and just blessing those who are underprivileged, I just want to say thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
You mentioned two names. You stole those two names from my mouth. I had Sashi Kiran from Friend as a chief guest on this program, and she shared some really heart-wrenching case studies where, her group, her organization is helping. Alan Lockington from Lautoka, his daily posts, some of them cut through the bone and just wrenches your heartstring as, the real stories at the ground level of people and the poverty they live in comes to the forefront. Lenora, Fiji has a lot of things that does not really need Band-Aid solutions. It really needs a think tank of some great-minded people that, needs to work together for the betterment of the country. Don't you think so?
Oh, absolutely, Sashi. Yes, and I have faith. That come the second half of this year, or towards the end of the year, we're going to have a lot more stakeholder engagement. We're going to have the think tanks that we need, made up of industry experts for helping to formulate government policy. And I really believe that is the change that we're going to see.
Well, that's a way forward, definitely. Lenora, you and I were born and raised in Fiji before independence. I think I'm right if I say that in terms of your birth. Was it just before independence?
Yes, 2 years before independence, actually.
2 years, okay. I'm slightly older than you. But we experienced that post-independence Fiji as it thrived for a while. Your dad would have told you stories about that. Your dad, a great hotelier, tourist industry was thriving, sugar industry was thriving. Let's move the clock forward to 2022. My point being, we lived in an environment which spelt out democracy in a number of different ways. Do you think the concept of democracy is alive in Fiji today? Is Fiji truly a democratic nation, or is it not?
Well, it is a democracy because in that we, have gone to the polls, the people have spoken, they have chosen their government. But when it comes to the running of this government, it is definitely not a democracy, more a dictatorship. We've heard this said time and time again about this two-man rule, my way or the highway, but now more people are starting to say it's a one-man rule. The other person's just, sitting around. But, I again, civics education, very important, Sashi, and I really look forward to civics education being taught in primary school and in secondary school in Fiji. Yes, we went to the polls, but in terms of running government institutions, I think it's been more like a dictatorship.
Well, in any democratic country, things that are enshrined as a right, for example, the freedom of speech, the freedom to assemble for peaceful protests, as I said, they're enshrined as a right of that particular human being. There seems to be a degree of curtailment of these constitutional rights in Fiji. I mean, on the one front, government could very well say those rights exist. But when did you see the last time a trade union movement being allowed to have a peaceful protest march for whatever reason? So, in reality, my question to you is this freedom that we talk about and we expect for granted, is it a farce in Fiji? I mean,
Absolutely.
people, well, there you go. You've just answered that.
It is absolutely a farce. And I don't know why this government is so scared, is too scared to allow people to speak their minds in a peaceful way. Take for instance, I was, in my head while the Australian Governor General was here, and I thought, some people should actually go and stand there with placards and say, freedom for West Papua and other placards, but they would just definitely get arrested, thrown in Totongo for a few hours, get questioned and so forth. So why is government so scared to allow the unions to have their say? Unionists or members of unions to march peacefully. We saw how many police officers were available for the visit of the Governor General of Australia. How about having those police officers on the street just to ensure, peace reigns when they allow a march? It just seems like they're just scared of public sentiment and public opinion.
Well, that is a sad, sad state of affairs. If you can't have your own people, I mean, look, in a business organization, if the business was not doing too well, the chief executive officer or the owner of the business would expect his managers, his down the line supervisors to speak up at the board meetings, or rather at the floor level meetings, and spell out what was wrong. And if it was a smart manager, smart CEO, would listen to the workers, so to say, at the ground level and implement changes. Similarly, a government has to listen to the people. And so what you've just said takes me to my next point. You mentioned, you could have protested with placards for West Papua, but you said you'd be taken to Totongo, locked up for a few hours, harassed, etc. So there seems to be a culture of fear in Fiji. Now, Why would there be a culture of fear?
Well, I think this was born out of, the kinds of violence we've seen um, a, a few years ago. We've seen that um, from when we understand some people have spoken up and have been asked to resign or have lost their jobs. Though happily, Sashi, you will have noticed, and I have noticed that culture of fear of speaking up and being identified as being, an NFP supporter or a Fiji First supporter or a SODELPA or a People's Alliance supporter, that fear is starting to fade slowly, too slowly perhaps, but it is still starting to fade. And I think it's come to a point where people are just fed up. They're fed up of being talked down to. They're fed up of being ordered to do this, and the other. They're just fed up of the way they've been treated by a government who is supposed to be looking after the welfare of the people. So this culture of fear, while it still might be prevalent in some parts of Fiji society, I see less and less of it on social media, with people commenting openly against policies and against works of different ministries, against government and so forth. This is not, and I don't mean the trolls, those people that are being paid to cheer on certain people and so forth, but this is just ordinary citizens who have their profile photos up front and center, who are not frightened of speaking their truth and speaking truth to their lived experiences.
So you would agree that social media in this day and age does play a very, very important role in rather a check and balance situation of the deeds of government.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Sashi. Unfortunately, as I think you had talking with Nikhil and just talking about, the use of social media, how to use it in a civilized manner without descending into name calling, racist, derogatory remarks, which is still something that we have to learn as late bloomers when it comes to social media in Fiji, perhaps. But social media has been a very important tool in carrying out and having that dialogue between people from all parts of Fiji and around the world about how Fiji is run right now.
Lenora, let us look at one instance of the application of the rule of law for one and all. Your parliamentary colleague, the Honourable Pio Tikunduandua, under any stretch of imagination, was assaulted by the Prime Minister in the precincts of the parliamentary complex. Firstly, how did the attack on your colleague make you feel?
Very angry. Very, very angry, Sashi. I was one of the four of us, including Mr. Tikunduandua and two of our youth members who witnessed this attack on Honorable Tikunduandua. It made me so angry. At first, I was very shocked. I was very shocked at the level of anger that was shown by the Prime Minister. But then after that, it was just this anger that this is allowed, because as we've seen from the video that was circulated very, very widely, his bodyguards were right there and did nothing to stop the attack. So that made me even more angry. And then, of course, the subsequent privilege committee and the police decision, or the speaker's decision, just made things a joke, seriously.
So do you think there are double standards being practiced when you look at the Parliamentary Privileges Committee? Some other members of Parliament were suspended for months and months for, one would say, lesser crimes, so to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's just, different rules for different folks. That's the way that Fiji has been run, apparently. And that is why I say again, people are taking to social media and just basically saying we're just fed up of the way we've been treated, and we really need to see that change.
All right. I can see my screen is frozen. We'll fix that up in just a moment. You're watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point live on Facebook and YouTube this afternoon. Our chief guest is Ms. Lenora Qereqeretabua, National Federation Party Member of Parliament. Please share the link on your own timeline so that you may include your family and friends in this broadcast as well. And as I said a little earlier, you can watch a full recording of this program on Facebook and on YouTube at a time convenient to you. Lenora, moving on, you've described yourself always as an advocate for women's rights and matters concerning women. Do you think there is adequate women's representation in Parliament at this current point in time?
No, absolutely not, Sashi. I'm a firm believer that our parliament should be representative of the people of Fiji. And, and that includes women. We make up nearly 50% of the population. And, by right, we should have more women in parliament. But again, easier said than done. I told you about how expensive it was for me to run in the 2018 elections. Not every aspiring woman candidate can afford the kind of funds that you need as an opposition candidate. There's also the patriarchy, the culture of patriarchy in Fiji. I mean, we're much better off than Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea doesn't have any women in its parliament right now, I believe, and the Solomon did and now doesn't. I think I don't have my facts straight, but I think it's a regional problem for the Pacific, where it's just not normal quite yet to have women representation at the level that we want to see. Samoa has a woman prime minister in Fiame Naomi, but she comes from a political family, and that may or may not have helped her. But when it comes to women in Fiji, and I don't mean just women, I mean diverse women, people with disabilities, people living with disabilities. The problem is, one, your profile. How well do people know you? How much money do you have to spend on an election? And also the support from home is very important. And for most women, I suspect, your first consideration is, what about the family? Who's going to look after the family? Who's going to look after the kids if I'm out, canvassing for votes and so forth, or if I become a member of parliament? For me, myself, my own personal experience is, if my daughter had been in primary school, I may not have put my hand up for public office. But in 2018, she was, in her mid-20s and, well capable of looking after herself. And we had enough help at home. So with women in parliament, I've spoken to a few women who have tried to convince to join parliament. But then, when I ask and they, push back a little bit, I absolutely understand why they would push back. And, with the kind of misogyny, the kind of bullying that can happen to women in parliament. I mean, Roshika Deo is a great example of the kind of foul treatment that women in politics suffer. And it's not just women in politics, it's women everywhere. But again, it's not the, when we have these women meetings, I always think, and a lot of people say the same thing, we shouldn't be talking to women. You're preaching to the choir. It's to the whole of society that we should be talking about women in politics and why we should be encouraging more women in politics. Sorry, I've gone off on a totally different tangent there, Sashi.
That's okay. Now, you mentioned Western Samoa having a female prime minister. Do you think in our lifetime we will have a female leading as Fiji's prime minister?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I have every belief and every trust in the people of Fiji that we will see a woman sitting in the prime minister's seat or in the prime minister's office in the not too distant future, Sashi.
Now, one of my pet hates, and I have clients who unfortunately have gone through this, and I'm talking about domestic violence now. Fiji has that high incidence of domestic violence.
Yes.
can be attributed to a cultural thing, can be attributed to uh, the male dominant type of society that we have. How can women best safeguard themselves against atrocities like domestic violence?
Oh, gosh. You know, again, like I just said, it's when we talk to women about domestic violence, they know about it. They're at the receiving end of it. So it's the rest of society's mindset, behavior, and attitudes that has to change towards women. And I always think, how did a perpetrator of domestic violence become that person? Now, I don't know. I couldn't say, but sometimes I wonder, did he as a little boy see his mother being brutalized? And for whatever reason, his mother did not leave, making this young boy think that this is okay behavior because mom hasn't gone anywhere, you know? And I cannot even begin to speak on experiences of domestic violence, Sashi. But again, where are the boys learning that behavior from is again the question. We've had incidences of rape of youngsters by youngsters, and speaking to some of the psychologists who have worked in that field. Um, some people from some of the denominations who have been working in that field, they say that when they sit down with a young perpetrator, they ask them the question, where did you learn this kind of behavior? And that's, I think, a question that we need to ask ourselves as a country. And stop preaching to the choir, which is talking to women about domestic violence, but instead trying to change the mindset of the whole of society.
And that includes changing the mindset of lawmakers as well, I take it.
Yes, absolutely. This no drop policy has to be a serious no drop policy. But then, Sashi,
Okay.
as well, sorry, if I might just say again, the stresses of life right now, not only in Fiji, right around the world, and especially during COVID, many of us don't know how to deal with stress. And we take that stress out on the most vulnerable members of our families, unfortunately. So there just needs to be, I think, more funding as well for the agencies that deal with mental health issues in Fiji. We need to have more people on telephones. We have to have more people answering phones when people call when they're under stress, not only women or children, but men as well. And men have to be able to speak with other helpful males to talk about their stress levels.
Yes, because there are instances where men have also been victims of domestic violence. I have actually defended a few of them successfully. And the first case that came up to me, I was taken aback because I hadn't come across domestic violence being perpetrated by a woman on a man. And that was a first for me. Now, Lenora, as Fiji heads towards the general elections, the question of responsible journalism has arisen in social media. Two media organizations in Fiji, as we know, they have been singled out as being the propaganda arm of the ruling government. Do you think, as a member of parliament, that responsible journalism is being practiced in Fiji?
To a large extent, no, Sashi. To a large extent, no. And I think you answered the question yourself, when you said that, two media organizations have been, pointed out as being the mouthpieces of the current government. And unfortunately, it also means that a lot of other journalists and other media organizations now have to self-censor. They can't be as hard hitting as they'd like to be because you got the sword hanging over your head. There's also always the threat of a lawsuit, and journalists really have to pick their words very carefully. The editors have to edit and edit and edit down to the point where there's no investigative journalism. I long for those days in the 80s when you had, great journalists who would go up and ask the hard, uncomfortable questions, and because you wouldn't have repercussions like the kind of repercussions you have now. So, take the way that Lenora Qereqeretabua, the former minister for women, was treated by the Fiji Sun. That was shameful.
Yes.
And that just, it, again, speaks a lot to the kind of culture that we are watering, the kind of grass that we are watering now. And I don't think it is healthy at all.
Well, at this juncture, I must also, in the interest of transparency, remind my viewers that I have indeed extended an invitation to the Attorney General in more ways than one, and also to the office of the Prime Minister, Voringem Bainimarama. I don't expect a reply. I don't expect them to be on the show, but in the interest of transparency, yes, I have extended invitations to them, and I hope one day that they may accept my invitation, come on the show, and clear a lot of things in favor of the Fiji First Party. And as the Prime Minister said when he got back, let's rock and roll. I'd love to do that on SSTP. Now, Lenora, the next general elections campaign has officially begun. How free are the political parties in Fiji to campaign openly? Are there limitations? Do you have to be scared in campaigning?
Not scared, Sashi, but we have to be wary of any trip ups. We have to be wary of the little landmines that could disqualify us and also land us in jail, a hefty fine, or disqualify the party entirely. So yes, we not scared, but wary. I think that's correct.
All right. So you're weary, you said those little landmines. So let me share this with our viewers. The National Federation Party leader, Professor Biman Prasad, has this week, if I'm not wrong, I think it was just yesterday or day before, Professor Prasad questioned the identity of the independent authority that would scrutinize the financial commitments of promises made by political parties and candidates during the election campaign. Let me also share with viewers the candidate's handbook states that a political party, candidate, or representative making financial commitments during the campaign, and listen to this one carefully, must give written explanation of how revenue for the financial commitment is to be raised, how expenditure for the financial commitment is to be made, how expenditure is to be allocated to different sectors and budget sector agencies, and if expenditure exceeds revenue, how the deficit is to be financed. Let me explain this a bit further for the benefit of our viewers. The new requirement for manifestos of political parties, there's a new section in the Electoral Act called Section 116, and in particular 4C says, any political party or the agent or political party supporter who, as part of their campaigning, claims verbally or in writing that their party is going to do anything that will cost money must immediately put into writing 4 requirements. And the requirements are how this commitment will raise revenue, where they will get funds for this exercise, how this exercise is to be carried by various sectors and budget sector agencies, if the proposal or proposals costs more than the money that government expects to raise from taxes, how will they meet the shortfall? And as Lenora hinted, if the political party candidate or the agent or political party supporter who makes this claim as part of their campaigning fails to follow those clauses, here's the big one. It's an offense. And if they are convicted, they can face fines up to $50,000 or a jail term up to 10 years or both. Wow. As I said earlier, the NFP leader questioned the identity of the independent authority that would scrutinize the financial commitments of promises made by political parties and candidates. My question is, who's going to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner? We don't know that yet.
No.
Now, Lenora, such a stringent requirement as part of campaigning, do you think this requirement brings forth a real checks and balance scenario as far as a candidate is concerned, or is this an extreme measure of scrutinizing candidates and political parties and putting a dangling sword on top of them?
Sashi, just listening to you again, repeating that the change in the act and what we're supposed to do as candidates or agents or supporters or parties just makes it so hard. And I think that is the target of the exercise, is to make it absolutely hard or impossible for political parties to make any kind of election promise. For example, for the benefit of the viewers, if a party was to say, the Penang sugar mill should be reopened, that's that could be construed as an election promise. Therefore, we have to say,
stop for a moment. I'm so sorry. Whoever's watching this, Lenora's only giving an example,
right.
And this is not part of a political campaign. So it's only an example. Please go ahead. So the sugar mill, go on.
Thank you. Yes, Sashi. So, so we're expected to say where the money's going to come from. We don't have the purse strings of Fiji in our hands. Government does. How opposition parties expected to know where to get the funds from? It's just boggles the mind.
Well, I'm sure you have discussed in your own party room of the stringent need to have a checks and balance system on the government as well. Because if they make election promises, then they're also subject to Section 114C, Section 1164C, to the same stringent rules that govern campaigning. Now, is it surprising that the campaigning has started? And when you look at that stringent rule and the Section 1164C, that we don't know who the independent authority is.
We don't know.
Surprising?
Yes, not just surprising, but well, I don't know. Some people would disagree with me and say, no, actually, that's not surprising. That's exactly what we expected of this government.
Well, it's bothersome. Let me tell you, it is bothersome because the rules aren't articulated.
No.
When you go to play first 15 rugby, you know what the rules are. You go to play basketball, you know what the rules are. You enter into an election campaign, and when you don't know who the arbiter is going to be, well, I guess one of the best things political parties can do, go and talk the talk, walk the walk, but make no election promises.
Right.
And that's the way to go. Otherwise, $50,000 fine and jail. Wow, it's absolutely, just stressful and mind-boggling.
Absolutely true, Sashi.
Lenora, Supervisor of Elections, the Office of the Supervisor of Elections. Be careful how you answer.
Sure.
And I will accept it if you don't, because I don't want you to get into trouble.
No.
What are your views as far as the independence of this office is concerned?
Well, I'll say this much. I've met the guy, went up and said hello to him. We were sitting at a cafeteria, and I saw him and I thought, well, I've never met Sanim. So I just went up to him and said, Bulan Naka, we haven't met before. I'm Lenora. Nice to meet you. So he was a bit surprised that I went over to say hello to him. But what does worry me, and I think what does worry a lot of us, is that, you have the Minister for Elections as the General Secretary of the ruling party, the Fiji First Party. And that, effectively the Supervisor of Elections, while we, do say that, it's an independent office, but there is the minister for elections at the end of the day, and he's the general secretary of the ruling party. So there are still questions in my head.
Conflict of interest arises.
Absolutely.
Now, what about confidence in the office of the supervisor of elections? Are we left at the mercy of that office, or is there a degree of confidence that things will work in a proper manner?
Well, we are not at the mercy of the office of the supervisor of elections. We have some amazing people, very astute people from the different political parties who are fighting to keep him honest, to keep the office honest. And when they have their regular meetings, party representatives with the supervisor of elections, there are a lot of questions, and I am sure that he tries at his level best to answer as clearly as he can to the representatives of the different political parties, Sashi.
All right. Now, as a current member of parliament, do you have any concerns as the country gears towards the next elections in terms of registrations? Now, I checked the elections office website. It states that some 664,481 people have been registered. Any concerns of registration in Fiji?
Yes, and not all of it is the responsibility or the fault of the elections office. I know that there are many people in Fiji who have not registered because they don't feel the importance of the responsibility that is on their shoulders to exercise their democratic rights. So I'm still trying to get quite a lot of people, especially around my neighborhood, registered. I know that there's been a lot of questions about overseas voter registration, a lot of questions about the people that have been leaving recently, Fijians leaving for seasonal work in Australia. Have they been registered? Apparently they have. But then there's the question of how are they going to then vote? And will they have the time to take their packs to the post office and so forth? But I see on the 3rd of April, Sashi, on the 3rd of April, the Fijian Elections Office put out a post to say that the seasonal workers and overseas residents can vote in the general election by filling and submitting the postal vote application form. In order to do so, they must write their name as it is on their current voter card. And they have to give the exact location where the postal vote package is to be delivered and when they apply. So, I would just urge those of you who are overseas and watching this show right now to like the Fijian Elections Office. It is the Fijian Elections Office. Like that page, and please communicate. Use the website to communicate with officials at the Fiji Elections Office. Ask them what the date is for visiting Nauru, for example, or visiting Melbourne or Canberra or wherever else Fijians live around the world. Please make use of that phone you've got in your hand or your computer, and do ask questions of the Fiji Elections Office.
Let me say to you, it's not as easy as it sounds. I'm holding here in my hand. This is my voter registration card, and you told me the other day when I spoke to you that this green card is no longer valid.
For Fiji voters?
Yes, I'm a voter. I'm
Right.
a Fiji citizen. Now, I rang the elections office and I spoke to a supervisor. I was told I was speaking to a supervisor. And this was about 3 weeks ago. I was told to wait until the 26th or the 27th, and then I could call back. Now, I've checked the website, and really, I mean, call me maybe dumb or naive. I really didn't find anything about overseas registrations. So I'll make a call again tomorrow. But overseas voters, I think most of us who are eligible to vote, we need to take that proactive step of finding out how to register ourselves. Lenora, one thing I was told, I rang the Consul General's office in Sydney. I spoke to the elections office in Fiji. Both organizations told me that this year they will not be sending teams out to different countries to register voters. And that shocked me because in the past, we had people from the elections office coming to Sydney, coming to Melbourne, Canberra, traveling around. I hope the information I got was wrong and that things will change because the election could happen at any given time. People are speculating. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Now, as I mentioned, 664 odd thousand people have been registered. How does this compare to the 2018 elections? Is this a larger number of registered voters? Or, I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
I believe it is a larger number, Sashi, but again, to take us back to 2018, there were about 170,000 plus registered voters who did not go to the polls in 2018.
170 odd thousand did not vote?
Apparently, what I have been led to believe. And this is, this comes back to, our responsibility as citizens of this country to exercise our democratic right to choose our leaders.
Well, if I don't turn up to vote here, I get a mail with a fine notice. It's
Exactly.
compulsory to vote, and I believe it's a basic right of an individual. That's one time in your life you make a choice as to who you choose to govern, whether they win or not. That's a democratic principle, a right that you have to go into that voting booth, take the pen, and put that tick. That's your God-given right.
That's right.
People exercise that. I'm not preaching to you, but people should. Let's look at the forthcoming elections. What is your assessment of the 2022 elections? Do you smell a change in the air?
Yes,
I
I
like
do.
that
I
smell.
do. I do. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm quite excited about the next elections. Sashi, everyone you talk to is just dying for a change. Some literally, actually, but people are just yearning for to see a change in leadership in Fiji.
And that message is loud and clear.
Yes, it is.
You're not wearing blinkers, don't have cotton buds in your ear, that you're only being influenced by NFP supporters.
No, it's just, I hop into a taxi, get on a bus, whoever I talk to, I just ask, hey, so how are you feeling about the elections? Oh, it's usually the same answer.
Okay, now the post-election coalition, that's a memorandum of understanding, has already been signed by the two party leaders, the NFP and the People's Alliance. If I may ask you, what are some of the highlights for such an arrangement?
Okay, well, I'll just share just a few.
Please
First
go
of
ahead.
all, democracy, rule of law, good governance, and human rights. Those are the pillars. Just a few of the pillars that the two parties absolutely agree is going to be part of the partnership. The power of the people of Fiji to work together. This is something that we've got to bring back, and we've got to be listening to people before we make decisions that affect everybody. As I said in my speech at the convention, growth and because it's about all of us. Moving forward is not about one group of people or one section of society who have all the money, all the capital, and all the opportunity, but it's about all of us because prosperity and quote unquote unprecedented economic growth is useless if only a few of us get to enjoy it. So I think that is the crux of the agreement between the two parties. Stakeholder engagement, listening more than talking, and just making sure that we touch the lives of the most ordinary of Fijians, that are the ones that are struggling the most, have to be brought up to a level playing field to be able to succeed and prosper just as other parts of society succeed and prosper.
One thing that I liked about the memorandum of understanding, and for fear of repeating myself, because I shared this in last week's episode with Professor Wadanarsi, and that was the memorandum starts off by recognizing the Itoke Vanua, so
Mm.
important, and also giving recognition to the indentured, the Girmitiers who came. Now, any document that encompasses and recognizes those two very distinct parts of a document, one, the Itoke, the indigenous owners of the land, the Vanua, is so important. And yet the recognition of, if I may term it, the initial Vulangis who came in and made Fiji their home. Such a powerful, powerful description of those two things. What's your thoughts?
I think that's one of the reasons I am in the party that I am in, and I'm looking forward to this working partnership with the People's Alliance, because we're on the same page. It was Mr. Rambuka as Prime Minister and Mr. Jairam Reddy as leader of the opposition. Um, Mr. Rambuka invited Mr. Jairam Reddy to go and speak to the Great Council of Chiefs, and that was one thing that Mr. Jairam Reddy, as the leader of the National Federation Party and leader of the opposition, said to the chiefs of the Vanua of Viti is, your success is our success. So your security is our security. If we are in this country together, and we understand your position, you understand our position, and together we can make this country the country that we can be proud of, when we can hand over to our descendants with a lot of pride.
Now, there are many detractors, and some people are now in social media, in some other quarters, espousing theories, etc., making rumblings, noises that this alliance is not going to work. The pact between People's Alliance and the NFP will fail, and they look at the past history, etc. Question to you: what gives you that faith and belief that this memorandum of understanding will see the test of time, that this alliance that is mooted post-election between Mr. Rambuka as the leader of People's Alliance and Professor Prasad as the leader of NFP, how convinced are you that this will see the fruition to the end?
Well, Sashi, we just have to look at the example of New Zealand, which is a coalition government, and this is how we are in Fiji. We are a coalition of different ethnicities, and we've been able to live in Fiji because there's a give and take. And yes, there will always be people who will disagree. There are some strong detractors out there, but I would just ask them, give it a go, give it a chance. We're doing this because we want to see a change in leadership. And we believe that this is the best chance for Fiji to see this change in leadership that we all want to see. And yes, we will not agree all the time, but that is the beauty of being in a coalition, having healthy discussions about what we may not agree on, what we may disagree on, and coming to some sort of meeting in the middle. But the most important part of this is that it must be the people of Fiji that benefit.
Well said. Now, in that speech at the National Federation Party convention on the 2nd of April, you started off by saying that you did not want to rant about the Fiji First Party. However, I'm going to put you on the spot professionally. How would you rate the Fiji First Party in terms of its achievements since the 2018 elections?
Oh, since the 2018 elections, I thought you were going to start from the 2014 elections. I might have rated them a little bit higher, but because most of my experience with them has been since the 2018 elections, we can't take away the good things that they have done since 2014, since the first elections, 2014. But since the 2018, I would not rate them very highly, only because we hear the promises, but many of those promises come to naught, in the years that follow. And, I use the example again of the SUVA, the CWM maternity unit, or the extension or the refurbishment or the renovation, a groundbreaking for which happened before the 2018 elections. To date, there's nothing there. And so I use that as an example, as they boast about the 10 or 9 years of unprecedented economic growth. Yes, they may blame COVID. Everyone's blaming COVID right now, but even before COVID, we were at the edge of a precipice. And I think what happened with COVID is we just got pushed right over that cliff. So my rating would not be very high at all.
Do you think the Fiji First Party is arrogant to the plight of the people in terms of so many social ills that affect Fiji society?
Yes, and I know that as human beings, members of cabinet have a heart, literally. But it's the PR machine. It's how they speak in Parliament. It's how they beat their chest and boast about things when the real story or the reality of the matter is anything but, as they say. Arrogant, yes, and to the point where they can be seen as lacking empathy, lacking a heart, really. I mean, I know there's some very hardworking ministers, assistant ministers, good relationship with a few of them. And I know I can reach out to them when someone comes to me with an issue. But that is not the case with all of them. But as a group, arrogant is one of the words that I would use, yes.
All right. And let me now discuss your aspirations. What are your aims as you gear up for the next general elections?
Well, my aim as I gear up for the national elections is to really listen to what people have to say. There's this saying that we always swing around, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So I think listening is going to be a major part as I get ready for the elections and, already doing that. But my aspirations is to just get more people to get their voter registration cards, encourage them to go and vote, exercise their democratic right as citizens, as taxpayers of this country, to choose their leaders. And also one of my aspirations is to support the women, the young men, the young women who would like to be a candidate in the next elections.
Okay. Some people have suggested that you should be the leader of the NFP. What are your aspirations for the leadership position in the National Federation Party?
Look, I'm a first-time politician. There's a time for everything. I have every faith in my party leader. He is a brilliant man, and he has a real love for the people, as we all do in the National Federation Party. And I have every faith that we're going to be in government with the National Federation Party in partnership with the People's Alliance and with Professor Biman Prasad as party leader.
My next question was going to be, what are your views on the current leader, Professor Prasad? You've partially answered that.
Yes.
He's made huge sacrifices, leaving such a well-paid job at the University of the South Pacific. Sometimes people don't realize that. And in terms of leading your party, how would you describe that? You mentioned he's a good leader.
Thank you for pointing out the financial sacrifice that Professor Biman Prasad has made, Sashi. Thank you. Not a lot of people do realize that. But, he is hardworking. He is so hardworking. He is, I think, right now in Savu-Savu, Lambasa, Savu-Savu, he's out there listening. He is a great leader. And as I said, I have every faith in him, and, people are saying, well, you should be the leader. There's a time for everything. There will be succession plans. Professor Biman, I know, does not want to be a politician for the rest of his life. He's got great work that he still needs to provide in terms of the economy for Fiji, for the region, for the world. And he won't be in politics all the time. None of us will be in politics all the time. But, there will be a succession plan. And when the time comes, the time will come, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
I think very well answered, because most developed nations and most developed political parties have a succession plan in place, and there's a transition that just follows eventually. Well said about Professor Biman Prasad, your leader. And in terms of the NFP party going on its campaign trail, how well prepared are you folks?
We are prepared. We are prepared, Sashi. I don't want to say what our plans are going to be, because people will, we will be letting people know where we're going, who we're going to be talking to, but we are well prepared. We've got a great back of office team. We've got a great engine room. Our supporters, we couldn't do this without our fans, our cheering squads, people just ringing up and saying, good for you guys, or, the people I meet in the public. These are the people that make us want to do the work that we do. So we are ready for it, and we just cannot wait for polling day, though there is a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of preparing the people to go and make the choice that we hope that they will make.
All right. Well, as you know, SODELPA announced its first list of candidates. And as Nick Hill said this afternoon, I think the People's Alliance are having a special broadcast tomorrow, or a special announcement. When is the NFP going to announce its list of candidates? Any idea?
In the near
Can you
future,
share that?
Sashi, I cannot give you a date, because our selection committee is still going through the processes of interviews and shortlisting and so forth. But you will be one of the first to know when we get ready to announce our provisional candidates.
I appreciate that. Now, you may have partially answered my next question when I asked you about your aspirations. My next question is, do you have a message to the people of Fiji? Those viewers listening, watching us today.
Yes. First of all, when it comes to getting ready for the elections, I think I want to perhaps say something to those who haven't ever voted before, the people who are going to be 18 soon before the elections, those who have already turned 18 maybe last year or this year. We'd really love to see young people become politically active, because it's the young people that can influence other young people. It's the young people who, as you mature, as you grow older, can become politicians later on if you wish to. But I was addressing a group of young people recently, Sashi, and I asked this group of young men and women, perhaps about 20 of them, how many of you are a member, a paid up member of a political party? And only one young person put their hand up. And this was talk, and this whole meeting was about youth and in politics. And only one of those people was a member of a political party. So I just want to encourage young people right now, if you're about to become 18, or even if you're not 18 yet, but you want to become active in a political party, find a party that reflects or mirrors your values, and go and get registered, become a member, and get involved. Just volunteer. If it was just for once a week, do that, so that you understand the importance of politics in day-to-day lives. But to the people of Fiji, generally, please register to vote. When you're going to register to vote, please check the details on your voter registration card, that your polling venue is indeed the correct polling venue, and not a polling venue of the same name but on a different island, which has happened in the past. And please, when it's polling day, pray to God, whoever you call your God, for the wisdom, the knowledge, and understanding to make the right choice.
And I guess if I may add one line to your message to the people of Fiji, on polling day, please turn up to vote. You
Yes,
must turn up to vote. Is that right? I didn't ask.
absolutely. Yeah.
I didn't ask for your permission. I just added that one line.
Yes, absolutely. Because after 2018, so many people registered but didn't go and vote. And for those of you who didn't go and vote, you could have been the change that we could have seen in 2018. Damn it. Anyway,
All right, Lenora. In conclusion, any thoughts about your participation in the SSTP program today?
thank you for the invitation, Sashi. I have to say, I was very nervous when I was informed that you wanted to invite me onto the show. And I thank you very much for this opportunity to be able to speak with so many people that I perhaps would never have gotten the opportunity to meet, seeing that we're stuck in Fiji still. Well, not everybody but me. But I just want to say thank you very much, Sashi. Thank you, Vince, your son. And Sashi, I just want to say again, my prayers and our thoughts are with you as a family, especially with your mom.
Thank you very much, Lenora Qereqeretabua. A big vinakavakalevu to you. Thank you for being chief guest in Sashi Singh's Talking Point today. And on that personal note, your good wishes regarding my mum. Thank you so much. Look, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you as chief guest today. I've known you for so many years, and sometimes interviewing an interviewer becomes hard. I'm sure that viewers will agree with me when I say that you're a young champion in Fiji's parliament. Keep on fighting for the rights of the Fijian people and stand tall and stand brave in the face of adversity. I thank you for your candid response to my questions. I take this opportunity in wishing you all the very best in the forthcoming elections. And before you go, please pass my lolomas to your wonderful father, Uncle Randike, as we used to call him. I have very fond memories of him. Lenora, thank you once again. A big Vinaka Bakalevu to you. And I will call and speak to you later. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
very much,
Lenora.
Sashi. Lolo Malebo.
And you, thank you once again. A big Vinaka Bakalevu. And more for now. Folks, don't go away because I've yet to reveal next week's chief guest. I thank all those viewers who have taken time to provide their positive feedbacks with regards to this program. Again, apologies for the late start, but I'm sure we've made up in that wonderful interview with Lenora. And as I say, we ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. Well, that's all, folks, for episode 18 of this week. A big thank you to my regular contributor, Nikhil Singh, for his input in the program today, as always, and to my SSTP team, a big thank you as well. I'd also like to thank you, our viewers, for watching and supporting our program. Hitting over 90,000 reach as far as the figures of Facebook are concerned is a big achievement for this program. Okay, time for the revelation. Next week, Sunday, 8th of May, 2022. Initially, I was not sure whether we should have a program next Sunday because it's Mother's Day. But I'll leave that to you. If the majority decide not to have a program, please let me know through posts on SSTP that it's Mother's Day and you don't want a program, and I'll talk to my next guest and see if I can transfer my next guest to the week after. Personally, I'm going through some tough times with my mum being in hospital, so Mother's Day is there on the agenda. However, if you'd like the program, give us some positive feedback. Okay, time to make that big revelation. Next Sunday, the 8th of May, 2022, our chief guest will be, I wish I had a drum roll here. Our chief guest will be from the People's Alliance Party, Representative Miss Linda Tambuya. Next week, our guest is Linda Tambuya. Really looking forward to speaking to her then. So don't forget, unless you have things to do on Mother's Day, let me know what your thoughts are. We'll meet you next Sunday, hopefully on time, at 11 a.m. Sydney time, 1 p.m. in Fiji and New Zealand, and at 6 p.m. on Saturday in Los Angeles and San Francisco, when our chief guest will be Ms. Linda Tambuya. If you have any questions for Linda, you can privately message me on SSTP page. Please like and follow the SSTP page so that you can get instant notifications of all posts and notifications. I wish you all a very happy and safe week. In closing, as I do always, I leave you with this quote. On the subject of freedom, Herbert Hoover said, "Freedom is the open window through which pours the sunlight of the human spirit and human dignity." I'll repeat that. Freedom is the open window through which pours the sunlight of human spirit and human dignity. That quote from Herbert Hoover. I am Sashi Singh, bidding you all goodbye, namaste, and ni samove. Goodbye, world.